Today I would like to say a few words about the historic validity of a concept which you have probably heard of, and that's kill your ego to reach salvation. The ego under question is mentioned hundreds, if not thousands, of times in the Vedic literature, and it's called Ahankara. It is one of the most subtle wraps around the soul, because often the spiritual soul is described as an onion, and the inner layers are thinner and more subtle, more etheric, while the outer ones are gross, like the physical reality we see now. It was one of the first elements which appeared when the Supreme Consciousness was engineering this universe, and the purpose of the Ahankara was to divide this Supreme Consciousness into small particles who will have the feeling of a separate existence. If a person wouldn't have Ahankara, he wouldn't be able to lead a normal life. He won't be able to even put on his trousers, since he will see no point in doing anything for a body that he has no connection with. He won't be able to recognize his relatives, because the very idea of having relatives implies that they are somehow different from you. Then how come we hear all this stuff about killing the ego in these Eastern philosophies? Especially people who consider themselves Buddhists, they seem to refer to this most often. The thing is that the modern teachings known as Buddhism in the West are based on old teachings, but are not exactly the old teachings, and such misunderstanding could have come about most likely because egotism, the quality of being selfish, self-centered, is also called Ahankara. This is a very common problem in Sanskrit. One word has 40 or 400 meanings, and the right meaning will depend on context. And modern people, they don't know the actual context in which the original holy scriptures were written, because that culture is gone, the paradigm is destroyed. So such mistakes are actually unavoidable. And in addition, there are certain contexts in which there is something like dissolving the Ahankara or transcending it. But both of these scenarios, dissolving and transcending, are parts of very rigorous meditation practices which the common Joe on the street has no chance even comprehending, what to speak of doing any of that. In the case of transcending the Ahankara, that could be also temporary. First, the yogi would disconnect himself from his physical body, which is actually not that difficult to learn even for modern people. With proper practice, it can be accomplished even in a couple of months, or in some cases even a couple of weeks. The soul comes out of the physical body in the most literal sense. Only this lingering connection remains through the silver thread, which is connected to the navel area of the abandoned body. Next, the yogi transcends his mind. Although this is also an initial step in the process, even that cannot be understood by most people, because modern men, they identify primarily with their thoughts. This step is kind of difficult to achieve for modern men, but it is still possible for everybody who is persistent enough. On an average, that would take, let's say, a couple of years of daily meditation, at least 1 hour. But those with the right samskaras from other lives with similar practices, they may start getting glimpses of how does it feel like to transcend one's mind, or manas in Sanskrit, even after a couple of months of practice. And so the yogi has risen above one more subtle layer. Then he transcends the layer of the buddhi. Again, it is done with very specific concentration and magic, should I say, techniques. It is only exceptions who can do such things nowadays. It's nearly impossible to even find somebody who can teach you. Buddhists translate it as intelligence in English. But again, how to explain what does it mean to see things to somebody who is completely blind? And only after that, with even more subtle concentration techniques, one can transcend the Ahankara, the famous Ahankara. And only after that, in this sublime state, where his vision is no longer blurred by all these onion layers around the soul, then he sees, he meditates on his pure self. He can perceive it without any distortions, and that's what samadhi is, liberation. If it has been a temporary samadhi, he will simply come back to his body and the body will come back to life. In the other possible scenario, in which the yogi doesn't simply transcend all these layers, but literally dissolves them, yes, you can say kills them, destroys them, that is at the time when the yogi actually leaves this body. He simply departs. The bodies, the physical bodies of the yogis have been seen to burst in flames, or other miraculous for the common man things may happen with the body of the yogi, but from his perspective it is just normal. He is just a master of the elements. Being a master of the elements is not something extraordinary that he, the special soul, has achieved. Just on the contrary, this is the norm, this is the normal situation, because all material forms, situations, bodies, environments, planets, they only exist if there is an astral and spiritual spark to which they are a mirror reflection. Like, for example, the modern question of how did the earth get populated with beings is kind of irrelevant. It's kind of a wrong question as such, because the physical environment of the earth has always been and cannot be anything else but simply a physical reflection of the thought forms and the reincarnational patterns of all the beings who reside in its lap. There are other branches of yoga which are more moderate, so to say. Mystic travel is not much involved in them, and one mainly focuses on the daily chores in the physical realm. In those cases, the Ahankara is simply purified. One retains this feeling of being a separate entity. But he is not egotistic, he is just kind and uses this opportunity of feeling separate from the others to multiply the fun and the learning, the reason for which God became many. Egotism simply means exaggerating the importance of the Ahankara. There is nothing unspiritual about having an Ahankara as long as it is used properly. And as far as the average Joe from USA who has been told, cultivate selflessness and that will smash to pieces your Ahankara, which is the last subtle energy separating you from divine nature. Luckily, he is also doing the right thing, although not exactly for the right reasons, but eventually, from a higher perspective, what he is doing will contribute to one day him having no Ahankara at all, although the mechanism of how exactly it will be achieved and the time frame will not be as he expects. Yogis who transcend or dissolve their Ahankara, they are not smart cookies who have found a shortcut of getting out of samsara before they even learn their lessons. Yoga is also known as Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga means 8 limbs or pillars. 2 of those pillars are called Yama and Niyama, and to have those completed, one must have already mastered, developed a multitude of noble qualities, of which selflessness is just a small fraction. If he tries to skip that, which usually takes many lifetimes, he will simply have no success in applying all the technicalities of the subtle transformations of energy. His kundalini will not cooperate, because blockages of Kundalini are nothing else but a reflection of not sufficiently developed divine qualities or unresolved loose karmic ends. For some modern men, it could be difficult to grasp this entire situation properly because when they hear about given qualities, they will apply their own modern understanding of what they are. Like, for example, he can perceive himself as a kind and compassionate person, and yet for him, that will not exclude approval of waging wars to spread democracy. Many have heard of the Eastern concept of when you meet the right guru and follow his teachings, you will get liberated. But not so many have heard about other Vedic statement which says that when the final days of a given soul in the school of the material world approach, only then he meets the right guru who shows him the path to liberation. Meditational techniques like those of the yogis are often confused with states of meditation or higher states of consciousness. For example, Carlos Tanner, from whom I took an interview some time ago, he had a vision of an Hindu god who came himself and spoke to him. And Carlos asked him that I have heard that meditation is a very good thing, it's very beneficial, but I'm not sure how to start and which technique to adopt. And deity replied to him that if you still see doing meditation as being different from your daily activities, you're still not getting the point of what meditation is. Actually, the yogis who apply all kinds of exotic techniques to dissolve the various layers of subtle bodies that they have, they are not a typical example of somebody who gets liberation, but rather a rare case, an exception, because the bodies are anyway dissolved automatically when one's time in the material world is over, but they rather do so to develop skills, to learn how to work with energies, skills which they will be using in the realms which are beyond the material universes. For example, the sparks of consciousness in those realms are known to be able, if they wish, to expand themselves in entire universes with all the individual souls in them and all the dimensions in which they reside. All the information of how is it over there in the subtle layers and in the realms beyond any layers in this video is taken from the Vedic Purana Bhagavat and from the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. I just wanted to say a few words about the ego because I think it's a very good example of how little man knows about his past, even in terms of topics for which he has plenty of books available. In the case of Hinduism and Buddhism, one can easily get a copy of the original scripts, and still what is written there is so poorly understood. There is a book called Red Shambhala. The author collected numerous documents showing actually how the modern so-called ancient religions actually were shaped in modern times, at least some branches of them, not all of course. And some modern converts to Buddhism especially, they even felt that this book is kind of offensive to their religion. But I don't see why they should feel in that way. After all, in the book are letters of Dalai Lama and other most respected spiritual leaders. And also, the author of the book doesn't imply that all this was done with bad intent. Just on the contrary, he shows how the religions adapt to the environment to survive.